Welcome to another video of the tutorial series on Resource Modeling Solutions Automated Modeling Platform, AMP. Similar to the previous video, we'll explore the connectivity between AMP and RMSP, but in this video, we'll look into that from the Jupyter Notebook interface. By the end of this video, you'll be able to use RMSP workflows in AMP. We're still working with the new short-term modeling workflow example AMP project. In the previous video, we showed how you can use RMSP tools in AMP through the AMP interface and notebook editing functionality. In this video, we're going to show how you can use existing RMSP workflows in AMP through the Jupyter environment. I have downloaded the 4 notebooks we closely inspected in the previous video and saved in a location. You can choose any location that seems more intuitive for you. So we have the 4 notebooks here. To do that, you can simply right-click on a notebook and choose Download. So now we have the 4 Jupyter notebooks saved locally in my computer. Let's open Jupyter Lab from the local folder, as you would normally do when using RMSP. Let's open all 4 notebooks side by side with AMP. The first thing we need to do is to connect this set of notebooks running RMSP locally with the AMP project running in the cloud. To do that, we need to define credentials that will let you log into a specific AMP project. We need to create an environment file called .env.amp and save it in the same folder as our Jupyter notebooks, that is, alongside the set of scripts that will run to connect to AMP. This environment file has 2 entries. The first one is a token, and the second one is the URL to the AMP service we'll connect to. To generate a token, let's go down to User Settings in AMP. In the API Tokens section, we can see any tokens that were created previously. The idea here is to have a long-lived token. So this one, for example, expires in 6 months, but you can set that up to expire even later than that if you wish to do so. This token permits our Python session to connect to our AMP account in the web service. We can leave the default name and date. Now click in Add Token. This pop-up window tells us this token will only be shown once, so we need to copy it. Now let's paste the API token on that environment file and save it. We can close this pop-up window. Now for the URL to the AMP service we'll connect to, we can simply copy the web address of this page in AMP and delete the ending. Now it's just the root address. So let's save the environment file and close it. This is the recommended way of setting up our session. Remember, your environment file needs to be saved in the same folder as your Jupyter notebooks. The alternative way to set up our session is to define those 2 things inside your notebook with Python code. So that's what we've done in this cell over here. This is exactly the same information as we have in that environment file. We're using the OS Python module to set it up. I'll leave this cell commented as we've already set up the environment in the preferred manner. Now moving on to running these notebooks locally. Really, the only change we need to make is to add the name of the AMP project in the rmsp.connect entry. Remember, our project is called New STM Workflow Example. If you're running this directly in AMP, the project name is not required, but you could keep the project name if you wish to do so. So now that the credentials are all set with the environment file, we can simply run this cell to connect this Jupyter notebook to our AMP project. And we know the connection has been successful as we get this message in the output of the cell here. Connected to AMP project, new STM workflow example in region AMP video tutorials. We're very familiar with this set of notebooks as we've inspected all of them very closely in the previous video. So let's go ahead and simply run all cells here. I have added the AMP project name to all 4 notebooks. So let's run all cells in the remaining notebooks as well. is of course Jupyter Lab, and you're likely familiar with it from using RMSP. You can develop RMSP workflows as you would normally do. Nothing changes. Now, one thing that's worth noting in the very end of the Estimate notebook is that some RMSP objects are not recognized by RMSP.toAmp. Resources that are not Python objects, such as Pico files, require a different pattern. Pico files, for example, will require this route here, a RMSP.toPico first, followed by creating a resource in AMP as a Python object, and then uploading this resource back to AMP with res.upload. Once all notebooks have finished running, if we open the folder where they are saved, we'll see some images that were saved from our notebooks. These are the same images that we can inspect inline in our notebooks. I have downloaded these notebooks from AMP as we're already familiar with them, but we could have started a notebook from scratch, for example, prototyped and developed a workflow in Jupyter and RMSP and brought into AMP. You would follow the exact same steps as we did in the beginning to connect an existing RMSP workflow to a specific project in AMP. Define the connection credentials and connecting the project with rmsp.connect, including the name of the project. Now let's bring these updated notebooks back to AMP. We can right-click on each notebook and say Edit, which will take us to the upload page. Then we drag and drop the new edited files here. Let's do that for all notebooks. We could also delete the previously uploaded notebooks and re-upload all from scratch again. Now, we're going to set up a workflow in AMP to update this model. This would be a typical modeling setup where you'd probably prototype and define your workflow in RMSP and would bring it into AMP for visualization, inspection, and to create the model update routine. So in the main menu on the left-hand side, let's go to Workflows. Now, we don't have any workflow set up in this project yet, so that's why we have this message here. Let's click on the plus sign in the top right corner, and let's give the workflow a name. STM, short-term model, update. A maximum runtime, we can leave it as the default of 1 hour. Now we add the two parameter scripts, the project parameters and the utility functions. In the workflow steps, let's add all 4 notebooks. And then we save this workflow. And now let's run. On the right-hand side, we have a couple of options for each notebook as well. For example, we can choose to go straight to that notebook to inspect it. We can see the notebook output, or we can delete this notebook. We can run just the selected notebook. We can run the below or run the above. Now the workflow continues to run as we can see. Now we have a green check mark for all notebooks and a final check mark at the bottom here. So we know the workflow has finished running. We can also inspect the run logs like start and end times and the total runtime for the workflow. We could have also set up this workflow with the notebooks developed in AMP, such as in the context of our previous video. This process would be exactly the same. Now, going back to the resource tree, we see the same resources newly generated from the workflow. For example, if you right-click on a resource and say Edit, we can check when it was last modified, In the case of the estimated block model, for example, it was just now, so we can confirm our workflow ran successfully and generated our estimated model. And this concludes our video tutorial series. We hope this series helps you get started with AMP and take full advantage of its user-friendly interface and collaboration features. If you have any questions, our support team is always here to assist.